6 months of silence can fill a mansion louder than any scream. Charles Walter had learned this the hard way, watching his 6-year-old son disappear into a world where words didn't exist, until a young teacher with kind eyes saw what a billionaire's money couldn't buy: the truth hidden in a child's drawings. The grandfather clock in the foyer struck 7 a.m. with the kind of aggressive punctuality that Charles Walter had once admired. Now it just felt like a reminder that another day had arrived, and Harry still wasn't speaking. Charles stood at the bottom of the curved staircase in his Georgetown mansion, tie already knotted, coffee already cold, checking his phone with the enthusiasm of a man reading his own autopsy report. 37 emails, 12 missed calls, a text from his assistant reminding him about the board meeting at 9. None of it mattered. Upstairs, in a bedroom the size of most people's apartments, Harry was probably already awake. He woke early now, had ever since Caroline died. The sleep specialists Charles had hired, at $500 per hour, naturally, had called it trauma-induced insomnia, which was just an expensive way of saying his son couldn't sleep because his mother was gone and wasn't coming back. Mr. Walter? Charles turned to find Margaret, the housekeeper, hovering in that way people did when they had something to say but weren't sure they should say it. She'd been with the family for 15 years, which meant she'd earned the right to hover. "What is it, Margaret?" "The new teacher arrives today, Miss Edward. I've prepared the study like you asked, but—" She paused, wringing her hands in her apron. "Are you sure about this? I mean, she's so young." Charles almost smiled. Young. As if youth was a disqualification. Every ancient expert he'd hired had failed spectacularly. Why not try someone who still had hope left in her veins? "She comes highly recommended," he said, which was only partially true. What she actually came with was a reputation for being stubborn, unconventional, and completely unimpressed by wealth. Qualities that the headmaster at prestigious Oak Academy had presented as warnings, but Charles had heard as possibilities. "If you say so, sir." Margaret didn't sound convinced. "Will you be here when she arrives?" Charles checked his watch. The board meeting, the merger talks, the conference call with Tokyo. His life was a Jenga tower of obligations, and removing any single piece felt catastrophic. But then he thought of Harry, silent and small, drawing his dark pictures in a room full of toys he never touched. "Yes," Charles said, "I'll be here." Bertha Edward arrived at 9:15 a.m. in a Honda Civic that looked like it had seen better decades. Charles watched from the library window as she parked between his Mercedes and his wife's Range Rover, the one he couldn't bring himself to sell, and climbed out wearing jeans, a yellow blouse, and sneakers that had definitely never seen the inside of a boutique. She stood for a moment, staring up at the mansion with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not intimidation, exactly. More like assessment, as if she were looking at a puzzle she intended to solve. Charles met her at the door before Margaret could. "Miss Edward. Mr. Walter." She extended her hand with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to exist in any space. Her grip was firm. Her eyes were sharper than he'd remembered from their interview. "Thank you for having me." "Thank you for coming," he said, which felt absurd. He was paying her. She should be thanking him, except he had the distinct impression that Bertha Edward didn't operate on normal economies of gratitude. "Is Harry awake?" she asked, glancing toward the staircase. "He's always awake. Whether he'll acknowledge your existence is another question entirely." Bertha smiled, not the patronizing smile he'd gotten from the other specialists, but something warmer. "Then I guess I'll have to make myself interesting." She followed him through the foyer, past the living room that no one lived in, past the dining room where a table for 12 sat empty every night, past family photos that now felt like evidence of a life that had existed only in theory. This is a lot of house for two people, Bertha observed. Caroline wanted something smaller, cozier. Charles heard the bitterness in his own voice and hated it. I told her we needed the space for entertaining, for Harry to grow into. And now? Now it's just a very expensive place to be lonely. Bertha stopped walking. Charles turned to find her studying him with an intensity that made him want to check if his tie was crooked. Mr. Walter, can I ask you something? That's generally what people do before they ask something, yes. She didn't smile at his sarcasm. When was the last time you talked to Harry? Not at him. To him. The question landed like a punch. Charles opened his mouth, then closed it. Opened it again. He doesn't talk back, he finally said. I didn't ask if he talks back. I asked when you last talked to him. Charles had no answer, or rather, he had an answer, and it was damning. He couldn't remember. Every interaction with Harry had become a performance. Coaxing, pleading, bribing, trying desperately to extract sound from silence. But actual conversation? The kind Caroline used to have with him, full of nonsense and laughter and the easy rhythm of two people who understood each other. That had died with her. That's what I thought, Bertha said softly. Don't worry, Mr. Walter. We're going to fix that. You seem very confident for someone who hasn't met him yet. Oh, I'm terrified, she admitted cheerfully. But confidence and terror aren't mutually exclusive. You just have to decide which one you're going to let drive. Harry's room was on the second floor, facing the garden that Caroline had planted, and Charles had paid someone to maintain. Bertha paused at the door, which was covered in stickers, dinosaurs and rockets and cartoon characters that felt like relics from another era. Does he like space? She asked, touching a silver astronaut sticker. He used to. Caroline would take him to the planetarium every month. They'd lie on the floor and look up at the projections. Charles swallowed hard. He hasn't mentioned it since she died. Bertha nodded slowly. Then she knocked. 3 quick raps that somehow sounded friendly. No response. She opened the door anyway. Harry sat at his desk by the window, bent over a sketch pad, his small hand moving in deliberate strokes. He didn't look up, didn't pause, didn't acknowledge that 2 adults had just invaded his sanctuary. Charles had seen this scene 100 times, but watching Bertha's reaction was different. She didn't gasp, didn't immediately start talking, didn't do any of the things the other specialists had done, the forced cheerfulness, the aggressive engagement, the desperate attempts to be interesting. She just walked over and sat down on the floor beside his desk, not next to him, not hovering, just present. Charles started to say something, but Bertha held up one finger without looking at him. Wait. So he waited. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. Harry kept drawing. Bertha kept sitting. The silence in the room felt different somehow, not oppressive, but expectant, like something was about to happen. Finally, Bertha spoke. I like your picture, she said quietly. Can you tell me about it? Harry's hand paused. Charles's heart stopped. It was just for a second, barely noticeable if you weren't watching with the desperate attention of a father who'd been waiting 6 months for any sign that his son was still in there somewhere. But it was enough. Harry's hand resumed drawing, but something had shifted. His shoulders weren't quite as tense. His breathing had changed, almost imperceptibly. Bertha didn't push. She just sat there, content to exist in his space, as if she had all the time in the world. I'm Bertha, she said after another minute. I'm going to be spending time with you. Not because you have to talk to me, you don't. Not because your dad wants you to, though he does. But because I think you and I might be able to help each other understand something. Charles frowned, Help each other? What could a 6-year-old possibly help her understand? Harry stopped drawing entirely now. His hand rested on the page, the pencil still gripped between small fingers. See, Bertha continued, I lost someone too. My brother. He was 8. Car accident, just like your mom. Her voice didn't waver, but Charles heard the grief underneath it. Old grief, the kind that had been lived with long enough to become part of your foundation. And after he died, I didn't want to talk either. Because talking meant people asking questions, and questions meant thinking about things I didn't want to think about, and thinking about things meant feeling things, and feeling things hurt too much. Harry turned his head slightly. Not toward her, just away from the paper. So I drew instead, Bertha said. Just like you. I drew because pictures don't ask questions. They don't need answers. They just are. She paused, and in that pause, Charles heard his own heartbeat. The thing is, Harry, Bertha said gently, eventually I realized something. The pictures weren't helping me remember my brother. They were helping me forget how much it hurt that he was gone. And that's okay for a while, but if you forget for too long, you forget the good parts, too. The parts worth keeping. Harry's shoulders started to shake. Charles took a step forward, instinct screaming at him to comfort, to protect, to do something. But Bertha caught his eye and shook her head firmly. Not yet. A tear rolled down Harry's cheek, then another. Then he was crying, silent. Shoulder-shaking sobs that he'd apparently been holding in for 6 months. And Bertha just sat there, not touching him, not talking, just being present while a 6-year-old boy finally let himself feel something. When the crying finally slowed, Bertha reached into her bag and pulled out a pack of colored pencils. These were my brother's, she said, setting them on the desk. I think he'd want someone to use them. Someone who understands. Harry looked at the pencils, then at Bertha. Then slowly he reached out and touched the box with one finger. It wasn't speech, but it was communication. And for the first time in 6 months, Charles Walter felt something that approximated hope. 3 weeks passed like a slow exhale. Bertha came every weekday at 9, stayed until 3, and never once asked Harry to speak. Instead, she drew with him. Sometimes they used her brother's colored pencils, sometimes crayons. Sometimes she'd bring watercolors and they'd paint side by side in companionable silence. Charles watched from doorways, from security cameras he'd had installed in Harry's room, with Bertha's permission, surprisingly, from the hallway, where he'd pretend to be busy with his phone while actually holding his breath. Harry still wasn't talking, but he was present, more than he'd been in months. You're wasting your time, Dr. Pemberton said during one of their weekly check-ins. He was the child psychologist, the expensive one from Yale who'd written 3 books Charles hadn't read. Art therapy is supplementary at best. The boy needs cognitive behavioral intervention, pharmaceutical support, perhaps. He needs someone who gives a damn, Charles said, and fired him. It was Bertha who noticed the pattern first. Mr. Walter, she said one afternoon, catching him in the hallway. Have you actually looked at Harry's drawings? Of course I have. They're dark, concerning. I've been told that approximately 47 times by professionals who charged me for the privilege. No, Bertha said firmly. Have you looked at them? She spread 3 drawings on the hall table. Charles recognized them. They were from the past week. Dark sketches, lots of shadows, empty spaces, the same concerning imagery he'd seen for months. What am I missing? He asked. Bertha pointed to the first drawing, what looked like a dark tunnel or cave. This is a car, from the inside. She moved to the second, shadows and a bright spot. This is headlights coming toward you. The third drawing showed a small figure and a larger one, separated by a black void. And this is Harry and his mom, separated. Charles's blood went cold. He was in the car? You didn't know? He was at school. Caroline was driving home from his play. She was alone. The police report said. Charles stopped, his mind racing back 6 months. The funeral, the chaos, the assumption that Harry had been safe at school while his mother died on a rain-slicked highway. Mr. Walter, Bertha said quietly, I think you need to ask Harry what he saw. That night, Charles did something he hadn't done in 6 months. He knocked on Harry's door and waited for permission that wouldn't come. He entered anyway. Harry was in bed, not sleeping, staring at the ceiling where Caroline had installed glow-in-the-dark stars, a universe she'd created for a boy who'd loved space. Charles sat on the edge of the bed. His hands were shaking. Harry, he said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me, not with words. You don't have to talk. But somehow, please. Harry's eyes flickered toward him. It was more attention than Charles had gotten in months. Were you in the car when Mom died? Harry's whole body went rigid. I know you can hear me. I know you understand. Were you there? Slowly, terribly, Harry nodded. The room tilted. Charles gripped the bed frame to steady himself. But the school said, the police report said you were picked up by your grandmother after the play. Harry sat up, and for the first time in 6 months, he looked directly at his father. His eyes were full of something that looked like betrayal. Then he reached under his pillow and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, one of his dark drawings. But this one was different. This one showed 2 figures in a car, a woman driving, a small boy in the back seat, and coming toward them, impossibly bright headlights. At the bottom, in shaky letters that looked like they'd been written and rewritten, were 3 words. I saw everything. Charles felt something break inside his chest. Why didn't you tell me? Harry just stared at him, and Charles realized the horrible truth. Harry had tried. Every drawing, every dark sketch, every silent scream on paper. He'd been trying to tell everyone, and nobody had been listening. The school records were wrong, Charles whispered, pieces clicking into place. Caroline left early. She took you with her. You were in the car when the truck ran the red light. Harry's tears came silently, as everything did with him now. Charles pulled his son into his arms for the first time since the funeral. Really held him, not the awkward pats and distant hugs he'd been offering. Harry felt so small, so breakable. I'm sorry, Charles said into his son's hair. I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have asked. I should have... Harry's small hand gripped his shirt, holding on like Charles was the only solid thing in a spinning world. They stayed like that until Harry fell asleep, and then Charles stayed longer, afraid that if he let go, his son would disappear into silence forever. What would you do if you realized you'd been missing your child's cry for help? Have you ever felt unheard? Share your thoughts below. Bertha arrived the next morning to find Charles still in Harry's room, sitting in the chair by the window, watching his son sleep. You look terrible, she said. He was there, in the car. He saw her die. Charles's voice was raw. And I've been trying to make him talk about everything except the one thing he needed to talk about. Bertha sat down on the floor, her usual spot. That's not entirely true. What? Harry doesn't need to talk about it. He needs to know it wasn't his fault. Charles frowned. Why would he think it was his fault? Because he's 6, and 6-year-olds think everything is their fault. The divorce down the street, the dog that ran away, the parent who died. She paused. Especially when they asked their mom to leave the play early because they were embarrassed about being tree number 3. The words hit Charles like a freight train. How do you... He told me, not with words, with pictures. Bertha pulled out her phone and showed him a photo of a drawing, a small figure on a stage, other children pointing and laughing, and the same small figure pulling on a woman's hand, clearly wanting to leave. The other kids made fun of him for having a small part, so he asked Caroline to leave early. She did because that's what good mothers do. They left during intermission, 20 minutes before the drunk driver ran the red light at Morrison and 5th. Charles felt sick. If they'd stayed, she'd still be alive, and Harry knows that. He's known it for 6 months. That's why he stopped talking, Mr. Walter. Not because of trauma, because of guilt. The room spun. Charles had spent half a year and a small fortune chasing the wrong ghost. Every specialist, every therapist, every expert had treated Harry's silence as trauma response. None of them had considered that a 6-year-old might be punishing himself for a crime he didn't commit. "How do I fix this?" Charles whispered. "You can't, but you can help him fix himself." Bertha's plan was simple, which made Charles immediately suspicious. "We're going to the accident site," she said. "Absolutely not. That's the worst possible... And we're going to let Harry say goodbye properly. He's 6 years old. You can't ask him to..." "I'm not asking him anything, Mr. Walter. I'm offering him a choice, which is something nobody's done since his mother died." She was right, and Charles hated it. They went on a Tuesday, the same day of the week Caroline had died. Harry sat in the back seat of Charles's Mercedes, the same seat he'd been in 6 months ago, though in a different car. The Range Rover had been totaled. Charles had never asked what happened to it. Morrison and 5th looked like every other intersection in Georgetown. Starbucks on one corner, a boutique on another, trees that were probably lovely when they weren't serving as landmarks for tragedy. Bertha had brought supplies, chalk, flowers, and a canvas. "Harry," she said, kneeling to his level, "I want you to draw what happened here, not the scary parts. You've drawn those enough. I want you to draw what your mom would want you to remember about that day." Harry stared at the intersection, at the place where everything had changed. Then, slowly, he picked up the chalk and started drawing on the sidewalk. Charles expected darkness, more shadows, more guilt. Instead, Harry drew the school play. He drew himself as tree number 3, branches spreading wide. He drew his mother in the audience, smiling. He drew them holding hands afterward. He drew the car ride, not the crash, but before. The two of them singing along to the radio. He drew love. When he finished, he sat back and looked at his father. "She wasn't mad at you," Charles said, his voice breaking. "She loved being your mom, even when you were tree number 3, especially then." Harry's lip trembled. And leaving early wasn't wrong. Wanting to go home wasn't wrong. The drunk driver who ran that light, he was wrong, not you, never you. A tear rolled down Harry's cheek. "Your mom wouldn't want you to stop talking because of her. She'd want you to talk about her, to remember her, to tell everyone what an amazing mom she was." Harry looked at Bertha, who nodded encouragingly. "It's okay to miss her," she said. "It's okay to be sad. It's even okay to be angry. But punishing yourself doesn't bring her back. Living the life she'd want you to live, that's how you honor her." For a long moment, nothing happened. The intersection hummed with traffic. The world moved on, indifferent to their grief. Then Harry opened his mouth. His voice was rusty, barely there, like an instrument that hadn't been played in months. "She sang funny." Charles laughed through his tears. She really did. And she made the best pancakes. Harry's words came faster now, tumbling out like water from a broken dam. With chocolate chips, in the shape of astronauts. She did, Charles agreed, pulling Harry close. And she said I was the best tree number 3 in the whole play. Harry was crying now, but talking through it. She said I had the best branches. You did, buddy, you absolutely did. Harry buried his face in his father's chest and said the words he'd been holding for 6 months. I miss her, Dad. I miss her so much. Me too, son. Me too. They stayed there on the sidewalk, holding each other while Bertha quietly took a picture of Harry's chalk drawing before the rain that was forecast for later could wash it away. Epilogue. 6 months later, Harry stood on a stage at prestigious Oak Academy, no longer tree number 3, but the lead in the spring musical. Charles sat in the front row, filming on his phone, something Caroline would have done. Beside him sat Bertha, who'd officially become Harry's tutor and, unofficially, the person who'd saved their family. He's really good, she whispered. He gets it from his mother, Charles said. After the show, Harry ran to them, still in costume, talking a mile a minute about his performance and the applause and how he'd almost forgotten his lines but remembered them just in time. Charles hugged him, this small human who'd found his voice again, and sent a silent thank you to Caroline, wherever she was. That night, Harry added a new drawing to his collection. It showed 3 figures, him, his dad, and Bertha. Above them, in a sky full of stars, was another figure, Carolyn, watching over them all. At the bottom, in confident letters that no longer shook, he'd written, "My family, then and now." It hung on Charles's office wall, right next to his degrees and awards, and all the things that used to matter. Now, only this mattered. "Dad?" Harry called from his room. "Yeah, buddy?" "Can we have chocolate chip pancakes tomorrow? The astronaut kind?" Charles smiled, blinking back tears. "Absolutely. I'll even let Bertha show me how to make them right." "Mom would laugh at that," Harry said. "She really would," Charles agreed, and somewhere in the house that used to echo with silence, laughter rang out instead, imperfect and healing and absolutely necessary. Because sometimes the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in words finally spoken, grief finally shared, and a family learning to live again.